It's nerd history time. The character we all know as Iron Man first appeared in Tales of Suspense number 39 in 1962. Now, as we know from the MCU, Tony is the son of both Howard Stark and Maria Stark, owners of Stark Industries. But what we actually learned in International Iron Man from 2016 is that Tony was actually born to two S.H.I.E.L.D. agents, Amanda Armstrong and a man named Jude. Now, Jude was a Hydra double agent but fell in love with Amanda, saved her, they made a baby. Jude told her that he was a Hydra agent, they fought, Jude went bye-bye, and Amanda wanted a better future for her baby, so Tony went up for adoption, and that is where Howard decided to intervene and adopt baby Iron Man. Now, aside from just wanting a baby, Howard also adopted Tony as a decoy for their secret firstborn son, Arno Stark, but we're getting off track. Tony had no idea about his true parentage or his adopted brother and was loved unconditionally, but he did still have a strained relationship with his father, Howard. This was caused by a few factors. Tony was a sensitive and reclusive kid, which contrasted with Howard, who glorified physical prowess. But Howard also partook in the drinky and was prone to mood swings. So Tony turned to electronics as a coping mechanism at barely 5 years old, as he started to believe that hardware was reliable where people were unpredictable and hard to understand, which is fair. Now, after attending boarding school, Tony eventually went for undergraduate electrical engineering at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, aka MIT, and he graduated with 2 master's degrees by the age of 19, which is ridiculous. Now, Tony found a mentor here in physicist Dr. Ted Slott, who not only taught him more in the realm of science, but also instilled the idea of ethical scientific practice. Tony was a genius and went to work at Stark Industries, but was clearly much more interested in living a playboy lifestyle. At 21, he inherited Stark Industries after both his parents passed away in a car crash that was later revealed to be orchestrated by Republic Oil, which is indeed the company that would become Roxxon Oil, one of the most shadiest companies in all the land. Now, within just a few years, Tony turned Stark Industries from solely a munitions firm to a multinational corporation with a range of interests covering virtually all types of contemporary scientific industry, and the leader at the cutting edge of electronics. Now, since Tony didn't have absolutely rock-solid business skills, he promoted Virginia Pepper Potts to become his executive assistant, leaving her with most of his work, to be perfectly honest. The moment where things changed came when Tony decided to consult a weapons contract overseas in the fictional country of Sincom. While here, Tony and his escort accidentally tripped one of his own company's mines, which took out his escort and very nearly did the same to Tony, leaving a piece of shrapnel in his chest, which within a short period of time would end up piercing his heart. Now, Tony was then captured by the warlord Wong Chu, who subsequently worked for the villain known as the Mandarin. Stark was given access to a small laboratory with another captive, the renowned physicist and Nobel Prize winner Professor Ho Yinsen, and he was instructed to build a powerful device for Wong Chu and his associates to use, but as we know, he and Yinsen built an arc reactor and a suit of armor, the Iron Man Mark I. With this, Tony was able to make his escape and take revenge on his captors, with Yinsen sacrificing himself in order to buy Tony more time to assemble and charge the armor. Tony was able to escape and met United States Marines pilot James Rhodes as he made his way back to American forces. Now, as a changed man and with access to all of his resources, Stark slimmed down the design of his armor and determined it was too powerful to be mass-produced, so he essentially chose to don the suit himself and act as a hero. He also provided a cover story that the suit was being piloted by a bodyguard, while he himself as Tony was a completely separate person. Only those closest to Tony knew he was actually Iron Man, people like his chauffeur Happy Hogan and of course Pepper Potts. Iron Man would face spies and criminals like the Actor, Melter, Mr. Doll, Crimson Dynamo, and the Mandarin. As the scope of his activities expanded, he became an instrumental factor in the founding of S.H.I.E.L.D. and became a founding member of the Avengers, even donating his Manhattan mansion as their base of operations. As an Avenger, he was among the group who discovered Captain America frozen in ice, and he even sponsored the membership of Hawkeye, who he had fought in the past. This was all as Tony dealt with the problems of a dual superhero arms manufacturer lifestyle. He was constantly updating and improving his suits, and he even underwent heart surgery to remove the shrapnel in his chest, and it wasn't too much later that Tony decided to stop manufacturing arms and devoted Stark Industries towards other technology instead. Now, as we learn in New Avengers Illuminati #1 from 2006, in the wake of the Kree-Skrull War, a secret meeting between Professor X, Mr. Fantastic, Black Bolt of the Inhumans, Doctor Strange, and Namor resulted in the formation of the Illuminati in order to strategize and coordinate with vital leaders in the superhuman community, and they sucked. But we will circle back to them a few times. Around this time in the 80s, Tony began to suffer from a very dangerous drinking habit picked up from his time as a playboy and probably influenced by his father's own issues. He ended up being cheated out of Stark International, lost the leases on various different apartments, had his assets frozen, and had all but one of his Iron Man suits destroyed, all thanks to the entrepreneur Obadiah Stane. This led to a time where James Rhodes possessed the armor and was operating as Iron Man until Tony created a much more sophisticated suit, the Silver Centurion armor, with the two briefly operating as the Iron Men. I'm only at 6 minutes, that's pretty good. After Tony defeated Stane, he established Stark Enterprises, a technological design and manufacturing company in Northern California, and he also became a part of the West Coast Avengers. Then in Iron Man Volume 1, number 225, an industrialist known as Spymaster stole the plans for many of the innovative technologies within the Iron Man armor, and he turned the plans to Justin Hammer, who then sold them out to criminals. This is Armor Wars. Facing off against dozens of criminals who were now implementing his tech to commit their crimes, he caught and disabled many of them while also wiping the computer records of his plans, and he did accidentally take the life of the second Titanium Man, aka the Gremlin. This got Iron Man labeled as an outlaw, and saw Stark having to come up with a whole story about the guy who used to be Iron Man losing his life and being replaced by another Stark employee, while Stark himself created a much more advanced suit, the Mark VIII. This leads us into the 90s. This saw Tony crippled thanks to an ex-lover, requiring a biochip in order to walk without his armor. Alongside the Avengers, he also traveled out to Kree space to take out the Kree Supreme Intelligence, who had been trying to siphon the sun as a power source against the Shi'ar and had destroyed a huge part of the Kree Empire. His biochip was then causing him nerve damage and gave him more problems thanks to Kirsten DeWitt, who attacked Stark's nervous system with a techno-organic virus, getting Tony placed in cryostasis. But after he recovered, he had to restructure Stark Enterprises thanks to business decisions made back when Obadiah Stane was in charge, which caused some fights with other heroes, most notably the Hulk in Iron Man 305 in 1994. Then in 1995/1996, there was a whole time when Stark, being influenced by Immortus, committed some truly horrible stuff and got himself murked, but then he was replaced by a younger alternate timeline version of himself, and then Marvel said that was a horrible idea and corrected it all with Heroes Reborn, and everyone was like, ah, we forgive you, and it was fine. Now, after a period of time where Tony faced his own armor becoming sentient, gained technophobia, upgraded his armor with new skin technology, and then became the new Secretary of Defense, we got Avengers Disassembled. This saw Stark manipulated by the Scarlet Witch, framed by Clarence Ward, giving up the Secretary position, and then saw the Avengers fall apart only to eventually come together again to form the new Avengers inside of Stark Tower. This then gave us Extremis. Extremis itself was the name for an attempted recreation of the Super Soldier Serum with some major modifications. During the Extremis story, Tony ends up being forced to use Extremis on himself, healing and becoming capable of directly interfacing with technology, including his newest Extremis armor. Now, it's around this time that it's also worth noting that Stark and the Illuminati also decided to shoot the Hulk into space. And now we arrive squarely at the first superhuman civil war. Now, a lot happens here, and I have done another video on this channel about Civil War, so you can go watch that. But essentially, thanks to a superhuman disaster in Stamford, Connecticut, the government planned to instigate a Superhuman Registration Act, with the government becoming privy to all superhero secret identities and all heroes becoming essentially government agents. It split the superhero community down the center, with Iron Man leading the pro-registration side, and he made a lot of big and questionable decisions. He revealed himself as Iron Man and convinced Spider-Man to do the same thing, which led to a lot of head and heartache for Peter, which eventually destroyed their friendship. He created Prison 42 in the Negative Zone to deal with the anti-registration forces led by Captain America. He built a cyborg clone of Thor that went out of control, and he used nanobots to control the Thunderbolts, all of whom were extremely dangerous villains against unregistered heroes. This eventually led to the surrender of Cap's forces and the passing of Steve Rogers himself, but it saw Tony become the new director of S.H.I.E.L.D. After helping to form the Mighty Avengers, Ultron would take over the Extremis armor and overwrote Stark's DNA, turning him into a clone of Janet Van Dyne with metallic skin. This metamorphed Tony went on a rampage, even fighting the Sentry until Hank Pym purged Ultron from Tony's body. Following this is when that whole firing off the Hulk into space came back to bite the Illuminati in the butt, when Hulk came back in World War Hulk and wiped the floor with everyone, Tony included. Now, following the repairs that needed to be made to New York, Iron Man faced another threat in the form of the Mandarin, reborn and creating an aerosolized form of the Extremis virus, which saw Tony literally having to cut off his own foot to eventually win the day. But that was nowhere near the end of Tony's problems, as he now had to deal with the entire Skrull invasion. And not just an invasion, but an integration, because the Skrull had literally embedded themselves so deep in the superhero community that the Skrull Queen herself, her name was Veranke, or whatever you want to call her, revealed that she had been Spider-Woman this whole time. The Skrull basically disabled Tony's Extremis virus and very nearly took him out. He led the heroes against the Skrull and did win the day, but ultimately Tony lost, as the president at the time was really unimpressed with Tony's performance, and so he removed Stark as director and disbanded S.H.I.E.L.D. Tony's technology was now non-functional. His corporations were in dismay, he had many new enemies and little to no allies willing to help him with any of his problems, and worst of all, Norman Osborn became his replacement, leading us right into Dark Reign. This was a pretty dark time for Tony, I can't lie. Tony was very briefly a part of the Mighty Avengers before he realized that he was not ready to continue with them. His Extremis abilities were also severely hampered and failing. He managed to destroy all records from the Registration Act, keeping the secret identities of heroes a secret from Norman Osborn. He went on the run, but of course, on top of trying to escape Osborn and his cabal, Tony was also losing intelligence by the day, slowing his thinking and making it harder to control his armors. He ended up having to use his very first ever Iron Man suit, but by this time, Norman had caught up with him and beat him into a coma, which was recorded and shared by Pepper Potts. Now, in this vegetative state, Pepper, who by this time had her own suit of armor, had found a hologram inside of it that showed that Tony had a means of rebooting his mind to back before he gained the Extremis virus. That means when the heroes did bring him back, he was taken by surprise when he read about the events of Civil War, Captain America being taken out, Secret Invasion, and Dark Reign. Now, next up is the Siege of Asgard event, for which Tony was still out of commission but did manage to show up using an old version of his armor, disabling Norman's Iron Patriot armor and arriving alongside a revived Steve Rogers and Thor. He helped to defeat the Void, ramming an entire S.H.I.E.L.D. helicarrier into him, giving Thor the opportunity to end the conflict once and for all. Now, obviously, that only brings us up to 2010, but if you guys want to hear the rest of Iron Man's history up until the modern day, make sure you like this video, and if the demand is there, a part 2 you shall receive. For now though, I'm Adam Andrews, this is Top 10 Nerds, stay safe, and peace out, nerds. Bye.